moving on to our fourth painting. This is going to continue to explore even more advanced reflections and a little bit more with some fruit and reflections back into the silver. But starting off with the dark value, just because I wanted to test to make sure this is what I wanted. So I'm starting here. On a container this large, really watch that you're following the placement guide and you are placing the values as indicated. You just really have to follow the form. Working with the upper right hand light source. All of the dark values will be to the left of center. The exception is on this outside edge. We have to have that fairly dark to roll it back. Coming in now with our mid value. I like this picture because it is an overall sphere shape, and so we know how to paint it. Crescent of dark at the bottom, light in the upper 1/4. This is a fairly large jump, and so just like on our watermelon, if need be, you can give it a little zigzag to help facilitate the blending. I'm also picking up where I put down a little too much paint. And now I can come in with the light value. And the way you can determine where to place the light value, this is where it's bumping out the most on that right outside edge. So what that does is it tells you that's the area that's receiving the most amount of light. So placing that light value in. Wiping my brush, blending in somewhat of a choppy manner. I want this to have a little bit of texture to it. Only wipe your brush when you start to smear paint around. So there is the medium, the first dark, and the first light. I'll see if it'll hold, but I'd like to try to put in just a little bit of highlight. Moving on now to the low dark, which is going to be quite dark, and just all of the others that we've talked about with reflections and silver. It has to be very dark to make it look shiny. And we will take low dark along the entire lower section. Make sure that that connects up. I'm going to add a little bit more dark because it's too big of an area for a low dark. It's already starting to look shiny. Again, really watch the form. This has to curve here, curve around. So that is the dark, the low dark, medium light, and highlight. And I'm still seeing a little bit of a stripe here. Now moving on to the inside, dropping down to a smaller brush. I used my 12 filbert throughout the last application. On the inside, what we have is dark value, a little dark value here, medium, just straightening up an edge there, and more medium in this elliptical shape, and then low dark. And of course, you can always come in with your mop and give it a little bit of a pounce and a simultaneous smooth. Don't go back and forth or you'll just end up with one value. You have to work with the values as you laid them on initially. We're going to completely repaint the background, so if you end up with anything on that background at this moment, it does not matter. So there is the body of the picture. Let's do this front leg. Using a 4 at this point, just because that seems to fit the space really well. Because this is in a receding area, we're going to have medium value. move down to the dark and rim the medium with that. And then finally our low dark. I feel like the medium got eaten up by the other value, so I'm coming back in with a little bit of light. Even though I said it was a receding area, we do need this to have a little bit more light for the sake of form. So there is that foot, and I wouldn't worry. Like, I feel like this is fading into this. We're going into the rest of it. I'm not going to worry because that's where the table cloth reflection goes. So that is not a big deal. But what you somewhat have to watch is that it stays symmetrical. Just check that. The other two are done just the same way. So go ahead and paint the other 2 feet, and then we'll move to the handle. The handle is painted by pulling the values across the short way. So going from dark, progressing up to medium, back to dark, and then a little bit of low dark to help round it under. Now you can put this handle on after you put we're going to put an oil background on behind this, and you can do this afterwards if you wish. But I had it transferred on. I was going to paint it. So there's your low dark. Dark, and then medium. And then at the base, some dark. Actually, you can fill in that little connector completely with the dark, and then come back in with a little bit of medium through the middle. And as always, we're just creating form. And I'll go back through and check my outside edges. They're a little raggedy right now, but I'll do that when I can have it at the correct angle. Let's move on to our grapes. We're actually going to paint the grapes in values of gray, and then we'll come back and glaze them. So this painting is starting off quite like a grisaille painting, of values of gray painting, with the idea that we'll come back in and glaze it. So there is my light value. Now coming in and just using the same grayscale from the the silver. And so just as diagrammed, this is my crescent of dark. Now notice I'm putting this crescent of dark in, and it is, I'm painting around, of course, that first grape, but when I'm finished, it overall has a crescent shape. It's not just echoing the shape of the grape that's in the back. A little bit, even though it's not diagrammed, I would be tempted to put some of the dark on that outside edge, just knowing that that's a receding edge. And this is how all of the grapes will be done. So there is dark, medium, and dark and light. Now I'm going to come back in with the mid value and connect it up. And I think the easiest way to blend these would be coming in with a small mop or filbert. And your brush will still be half on one value and half on another. My light is completely gone, so coming back in with highlight. Make sure all of the grapes appear that they're back behind. And strengthen any dark that is necessary. Because what we're doing here is going to create the form, because the next stage, all that will do will be to create the color. So all grapes are painted in this way, so go ahead and do all of the grapes, and I'm going to move on to the plum. This plum is quite dark, and it will appear lighter and have more form when we come back in on subsequent steps, so don't worry about that yet. But I'm taking and basing in the medium value, painting right over the lights and the darks in this area. And now coming in with the first dark. And again, just creating that crescent of dark that we've had so much practice with. It's theoretically, I've just painted about 15 grapes in sphere shapes. And then finally the low dark. To start that little bit of a depression. placing just a little bit of dark. And again, I don't ever think plums look like much until the lights are added, and of course subsequent stages. So putting in a little bit of light. Make sure that it's light, medium, dark, medium, and then light. In other words, the medium and the dark cannot touch, and light on a sphere shape does not sit on the outside edge. So it has to be slightly in from that outside edge. Just as diagrammed, but sometimes I think things move. So that is the first stage on our plum, and we need all of the grapes in, and this would probably be a good time to dry, and then we'll put in our tablecloth and background. My painting is dry, so I'm going to start putting in this tablecloth and starting in the back with low dark. I'm using a pretty big brush, but I will come back in with a small brush and make sure that I'm real close and tight next to the objects. Now this back line, we are going to blend that into the wet background. So that doesn't have to be super crisp, because we're going to come back in and take care of that by blending. To make this tablecloth recede back, we'll use value, so it's darker and a little bit duller, and on the cool side, meaning it's a little bit bluer than what we're going to use as we get closer to the front. So there's our darkest value. Now I'm picking up slightly lighter, using the dark value. Now you could do this first if you care to. Certainly your choice. You want to be sure that this dark carries around just perfectly across. I'm going to come in with kind of a clean brush to clean it off of some of these objects as I go. And now we have our medium value. And if you want, you can draw a little guideline to show where one value to the next is going to meet. This outside edge, it can meander slightly, have minor ins and outs. And that'll just help make it have slightly more interesting shadows. We want this to be smooth, but it doesn't have to be perfect because this tablecloth is a little bit sheer, so it's going to have highs and lows. But like I said, painting around the objects, and just rest assured that I will go back and clean up where I haven't done such a great job. And still the medium value. As always, we're not concerned with our shadow work because our shadow work will be added when this is completely dry. Unfortunately, this is not a big jump, and so it's very easy to blend these values together. Now across the front, the rest over here will be our medium value. Now across the front, we're going to place light value. And this light needs to be, we don't want this a hard edge, but it has to be all across that front edge section. And that's what's going to make it look like that tablecloth is curving over the top. As always, once you start putting other colors around it or values, I think our silver pot looks totally different now that it has this white cloth near it. When you go to blend, be sure that you're going across. Cleaning up as you go with, I have just the tiniest amount of thinner on my brush, and that seems to clean things back adequately enough. Now this whole length of the tablecloth across the bottom, that's all just the medium value. And that just goes off the edge. Then we have a brown table over it in this left section, and that's going to basically do the same thing in that, make sure this lines up, and you of course can transfer this on properly, but we're going to have medium value through here. This is where if you didn't do any minor ins and outs on the edge of your cloth, you can do that now. We have to have this dark table on this side to balance it out. Otherwise the white would just dominate. And so by putting this interesting dark shape over on this side, it just helps balance out the tablecloth. And the large silver pitcher also. So there's medium value, and then going across the bottom is just a little bit darker, medium plus dark value. And this cloth goes just pretty straight down. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight. And this edge of this table, not necessary to make that crisp. You can take some raw sienna plus white, and lighten up the leading edge of this table. And that is the tablecloth, going from dark, getting progressively lighter. What we need to do now is add in our background, and before we dry, in my case, clean up any messy areas, and then we will start on some of the detail work. As you can see, I went ahead and put in the background and gave it a little blend here, just a little bit of one, and dried the whole thing. So what that leads us to is it's now time to start the glazing on our grapes, and of course the exciting reflections. The light section on each grape, we're going to glaze with just a very thin film of yellow, and just use the purest yellow that you have on your palette. What happens is when you glaze anything that's gray with yellow, it's going to go a very controlled green. Now here you can see that's way too heavy, and I'm just leaving that for just a moment, and I'll come back and buff it out. I would leave the dark area for the violet that we'll be adding. We're putting yellow in the medium and light area, and because yellow is so light, and then we'll put violet in the dark area because violet is so inherently dark. And so we're changing the color, but we're also thinking, well, let's, make it easy on ourselves. Put the light color where it's already light, and put the dark color where it's going to be dark. So there is the initial glaze with the yellow. Now coming in with some of the violet. And let's concentrate on this middle grouping here. So you can see that they are pretty much green and pretty even. Now I'm coming in with violet, ultramarine plus blue, and I'm going to make the dark sections that violet color. Obviously each one will be done in that way. I think take this over a little bit more. What I also like about doing this is it makes our plum not so isolated, because our plum would look very purple if we just left these as green grapes. So there is that little bit of purple. I'm going to just carefully blend that purple or violet over. Now we have a Tokay grape. And if we had tried to do this wet into wet, putting down yellow, green, and then violet, probably would have just gone to mush. And this way we can control it through the glazing process. Because granted, you still have these near complements next to each other and blending into each other, but fortunately it's just a little whisper of a blend. So each of the grapes is going to have this treatment. And then of course we'll come back on these grapes and add pass-through light and shines and yeast mold, cast shadows, etc. But very easy way to take grapes that were previously looking like a bunch of ball bearings, and now they're on their way to looking like grapes. Let's move to our reflection. This main reflection, well, the reflection we're going to start with, that is the bottom of this silver teapot is really showing the tablecloth down below. So I'm coming in with the mid value from the tablecloth and just curving and placing it on. It's pretty solid, but it's not as solid as it would be if I were painting just a tablecloth, because we do want some of the underneath to glow through, underneath form of the teapot, that is. So I'm placing this on, just dry brush, and now I'm trying to lose the edges of this just slightly. It will be the most apparent here. This is where it's going to catch the most reflection, mainly because this is the section on this pot that's bulging out the most. Starting to really define that little foot there. Now let's move it down, and we have a really cool reflection of the cloth up at the top. It's still just using that mid value. Gets placed on, and then tickling out the edges. To lose those edges, just, you can even go in a circular motion, but you just pretty much scrub them away. And this should curve up a little bit to stay with the form of the picture. And that's pretty much where that reflects. Now we need to go back to the underneath again and add in some reflections from our grapes. To put the grapes on the tablecloth, it can be dry or not, it doesn't really matter. But start off with just that little wash of yellow again, and you're just creating grape shapes with the yellow, and it should be a film. Just a look of some overlapping grapes on a cloth. That's all we're after. And same with over in here. So you're just creating that overall shape of the grapes with the wash of yellow. Now coming in with violet. And this is where you can come in and actually do the shade. Now if your paint won't move, you can, on these washes, you can always come in with some of the Mona Lisa turp or whatever you like to use to thin things down with. We're going to put a really strong shine, reflected light over the top of these, so they can be pretty distinct, but don't get too worried about them. It's just a distorted illusion of grapes. Obviously, knocking them down a bit is a good plan. Now the ones on this side can be a little bit more distinct just because they're closer to the actual grapes. The reflection, that is. So that's, at this point, this is what our reflections are like. The next thing we're going to do is add some detail to these feet. What happens on these feet, we have to give them the look of, they have like a little bit of embossing. So we'll start off and just put alternating black lines. Do the same thing down at the bottom. And let them fade at the top. Just using black. This is also helping reshape these little feet here. If yours got distorted when putting in the tablecloth like mine did. And then coming in with some medium gray in between. Just to show that some light is getting caught on those raised areas. It's most distinct on this middle one. I'm strengthening the reflection that kind of got lost in the mix. we have a stem that comes out of the pear, or pardon me, the plum. And just putting that in with a little bit of burnt umber. Shading the underside with some black. Still not really showing up until you come in with pretty much anything light on your palette. I just picked up some raw sienna plus white. And there's that stem. Let's add the shines to our grapes. We're going to start with warm white and add the shine in the upper 1/4 of each grape because that's where our light is coming from. I'm going to rearrange some palettes here. And as we have learned as we've gone through this study of reflections, whatever you do on the positive image, you come in and do on the reflected one as well. So now coming through, I've taken my detail brush, flattened it a little bit so I can blend these down. Any grape that you see whole, for example this one on top here, that's the one that's going to be the very lightest. And then the ones that are way in the back of the grouping, like this one, that's when you'd probably want to see the least of a highlight. And then coming through with blue tint, which is white plus a little bit of blue, we can add the reflected, actually this is the pass-through light, where on a grape, because it's translucent, if you can see the lower left exactly opposite of the light, you can add this smidge of pass-through light. This is right on the outside edge or slightly in. You place it and then blend it in. Now our grapes are starting to look more like grapes rather than just a round object. You can come back right on that 7 o'clock exactly opposite of the light source area and punch it up again. Indicate it to a certain degree within the reflected image. Let's take a look at our plum and see what we can do there. With this plum, we can come in and add a shine just with this blue tint. And I think while I have it on my brush, I might as well add the pass-through light to the grapes that I skipped. A plum is not very shiny. We could make it shiny, but that would be not very realistic. But starting off with blue tint, this side is turned the most toward the light, so it's going to receive the most amount of light. This is all dry brush. Maybe coming in with some of the blue tint to act as the yeast mold, that fermentation process that happens on all pieces of fruit. If the stem does not appear as if it's going down into the piece of fruit, just darken either the stem or that crevice, and then it will look like a unit. Well, I think what we have left are adjustment on the silver, shines and shadows. We have to make the darks, especially on this left side, darker. Everything is dry, including the reflection, of course. But coming in with black and just coming back in the original dark area. Be sure that your brush is 100% free. That's what I'm doing at this moment. 100% free of any other color other than black. And just strengthen this, like I said, the original dark area. We're not making new dark areas. You're just making the first one, and you can't get this dark when you start. Just making these first dark areas one value darker. Plus, the other thing that we're doing is we're making it a little bit darker where our reflections are, just to push those down a bit. Our other goal is the idea of lost and found edges, and we definitely want this edge, that outside left edge, to be lost in the background, and then we will find it with some reflected light. I think the inside could be a little bit darker. And this edge looks very pasted onto the background, so let's come in and make it darker as well. To me, this made our cloth look a little bit dirty, and so what we'll do there is just come back in with some of the cloth color and find that again. I do like how the edges are fading into the background. If your grapes got a little bit lost, you could come back in and find those as well. Kind of like these grapes coming out of this darkness. And they're really taking on more of a greenish cast. And remember, especially on this left side, it's just very, very implied. Let's build our high shine. Sometimes you can't tell what you need until you get your high shine on. The lightest will be here. Let's go up a bit. I'm just coming in with the last silver color that we used. Get a little bit lighter on the inside. Now coming in with warm white, brightest area, brightest area. And there's actually now a little shine that goes in the middle of the cloth. Building that center area. A few little streaks. Just some little skim lights that occur because this is just so shiny. Now, if yours does not appear light or bright enough, make sure that you haven't started your initial shine in too small of an area. You have to have a large film area, otherwise you can't build these brighter shines into it. Let's do the shine on the handle. The shine on the handle, all that has to really happen is you have to show where the width is, or the edge that's catching the light. And you have a good liner, and the paint has to be exactly the right consistency. And then it's not too tricky. Coming in with warm white and lining what is in essence the leading edge of this handle. I'm going to block some of it out. I think that's That's kind of the easiest way to, if you get outside of where you're trying to hit, sometimes it's easiest to come back in with just some of the background color. But that's pretty much all we have to do on that handle, is just show where the light is catching on that leading edge. It will be the brightest right up at the top. Again, I like how this kind of looks like it's just coming out of the darkness, but finding a few of those key areas. Well, you never know if your shines are correct until you put in the shadow work. And actually, my favorite part on this is how easy the shadow is on the teapot. Because the teapot is elevated, what happens, the feet just pretty much cast a shadow. And so start with black right under the feet. Darken that side just a little bit. This one just the same. Letting it fade to nothingness. I'm just using black and just using a dry brush. We want these to look transparent. But if they don't look transparent, or it's not moving at all, you can come back in with some extender of some sort. The shadows on these grapes, if need be, you can cast, first of all you have to cast a shadow where the grapes, cast that shadow where it's resting on the table. And then one grape can cast a shadow onto another, but remember that our shadows only fall to the left. So in this little grouping, there's no receiver to the left. These grapes in the back, again, we just need a shadow to set them down. Here, perhaps one grape will cast a shadow onto another. The plum is finally something substantial, so it's going to cast a fairly strong shadow. Grapes, casting those puddle shadows. Then on our cloth will cast a shadow onto the table. Where it's raised up, there could be some distance between the shadow and the cloth, and then where you want to say the cloth is laying flush up against the table, make it just a very thin line. division isn't strong enough, you can get that as well. If the back of the cloth just looks too pronounced, you can come back in and glaze this darker, very similar to what we did on our silver pitcher. We just generally don't want the eye to go where there's nothing to see, so if you glaze this back edge, it just kind of helps focus the eye in on the important areas. And then you can also take a look at the front edge of your cloth. If it's not apparent, you can come back in with warm white and strengthen that edge. And you could, of course, come in and put in any ripples in the cloth that you might want, any light on the edge of the shadows. Just adding that one more dimension. I think that has it. This is our quick painting. So go ahead and let it rest for a while and see if you can see anything that you might want to change, and varnish it, and then look at it again and get ready for our next painting.